Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Literary Thursday. We're going to start the program at 6:03 to allow other participants to come into the room. Thank you.
Trisha, am I allowed to cuss?
I, I'm gonna pass that question to someone else.
Oh, okay.
Saying that
Thoughts, Shante?
he's not.
Um, I won't say yes, I won't say no. I mean, some of our
Okay.
authors have used choice words if it goes along with it. So
It
I mean,
might
I guess
become
it's
part of
okay.
my story, but I don't know yet. I don't know what's gonna happen.
It's fine
That's the
if
only
that's a
place
part of it.
profanity could potentially rear its ugly head, but other than that, I'm gonna keep it clean.
Okay.
We don't expect a lot of children in the
No, he
audience.
didn't know that.
No,
He said he.
Okay.
No, we have an adult
none.
audience
It's
here.
an adult program.
All right, there we go. There we go. They probably heard something like it.
Yeah.
He didn't really know.
Okay, good evening, everyone. The time is now 6:03. Uh, Thank you all for joining us for another Literary Thursday. I hope everyone is doing well this evening. My name is Shantae Gaines, and I am the manager at the South Jamaica location. Before my colleague, Patricia Murray, Trisha, um, introduces our author this week, I would like to provide you with some Queens Public Library announcements. This Black History Month, join Queens Public Library as we celebrate the powerful legacy of Black labor and its central role in shaping American history and culture. Our 2025 theme, African Americans and Labor, highlights the profound ways that work has intersected with the collective experience of Black people. Pick up a copy of our Black History Month journal at your local library and browse our curated book list, all ages programs, and more at queenslib.org/BHM 2025. What's your favorite thing to do at the library? Borrowing a beloved book, learning a new language, taking a craft, or fitness workshop? Get creative and show us. Submit a photo to the 8th annual Share Your Love for Queens Public Library contest, February 1st through the 28th, for the chance to win a special prize. We can't wait to see all of the ways you love QPL. Learn more at queenslib.org/librarylovers 2025. Lastly, the Queens Public Library mobile app is your gateway to QPL services on your mobile device. With 96 language options, you can search our catalog, read, listen to, and watch our digital materials, view your account information, and much more. Download the QPL app today for your Android and iOS phones and tablets at
But then he went back to the capitalism.
connect.queenslibrary.org. Thank you for listening. And now I'm going to turn it over to Trisha.
Thank you, Shante. My name is Trisha. I'm the general librarian at Long Island City, and tonight we have the pleasure of interviewing Preston Lauterbach, author of Before Elvis, the African American musician, the African-American musicians who made the king. I'm going to read a short bio and then jump into a discussion. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter your questions in the chat or raise your hand to be unmuted. Preston Lauterbach is the author of the American music classic, The Chitlin Circuit, as well as two secret histories of Black culture, Beale Street Dynasty, and Bluff City. Preston has co-authored 3 memoirs with significant figures in Black music, including Brother Robert with stepsister of Blue Man Robert Johnson, Timekeeper with Memphis soul drummer Howard Grimes, and Spirit of the Century with the Blind Boys of Alabama. His work has earned Book of the Year recognition from Wall Street Journal, NPR, and the Rolling Stone. Now I would like to welcome tonight's author, Preston Lauterbach.
Hello, thank you. Wonderful to be with y'all. Well, I'll tell y'all a little bit about the book that we're discussing tonight. Of course, it's called Before Elvis: The African American Musicians Who Made the King. And the book contains profiles of artists who really came before Elvis and Elvis Presley in significant ways and inspired him, were really the cornerstones of his style. And the idea for the book came about through seeing the Elvis movie that came out back a few years ago. And I saw it myself and enjoyed it. There's one scene in particular in which Elvis is in a juke joint in Memphis, an African-American bar. And it's like, he's there with basically all of his heroes and influences: Big Mama Thornton, Little Richard, B.B. King, Sister Rosetta Tharpe. It's like, I think Whitney Houston's there. I think the Fresh Prince might be there. I mean, it's loaded. And it was such an interesting moment. And then afterwards, I was reading what a lot of the critics said about the film, and they wanted to know more about Elvis's African-American influences and Elvis's relationship to Black music. So here, that's kind of what I've been doing for the past 20 years. And I thought I can handle that. So the pitch for the book really wrote itself. And I was able to feed off of a lot of questions that critics brought up about the film, and then just kind of dig into my own pocket of research and of sources. I already knew who I needed to profile for the book. And so I ended up, of course, there was a broader, I guess, list of possibilities than I ended up settling on, but I ended up with about 5 key figures who I profiled. One, Arthur Big Boy Crudup, was the composer and original recording artist of a song called That's All Right. Well, Crudup, his version came out in 1946. In 1954, the exact same song became Elvis Presley's first hit, the one with which he supposedly invented rock and roll. So, how you can invent something out of something that already exists is a question. Another of the key figures was Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton. I think that people all around the world, whether they're Elvis fans or not, are familiar with his version of the song Hound Dog. But not so many of them realize that Big Mama Thornton recorded the exact same song 3 years, as the title says, before Elvis. From there, we get into a music that Elvis considered to be his first love, which was African-American gospel music, and the heroic figure of Reverend William Herbert Brewster. Brewster was a terrific songwriter and composer in his own right. He wrote not just the first, but the first 2 million-selling Black gospel recordings. They came out in the late 1940s. He also was a minister of a big church there in Memphis, the East Trigg Missionary Baptist Church, and was just a general patron of the music. He brought musicians together. He helped organize them. He trained them. Of course, he had a great church choir with this brilliant soloist named Quincy Anderson, who Elvis loved going to listen to. Brewster was also a political activist. He was registering Black voters in the 19-teens. So, I mean, he was participating in what came to be known as the Civil Rights Movement about 40 years prior to that really taking shape as a thing, as we say. And so Brewster is this titanic figure who is right there in Memphis, where Elvis was growing up and learning his musical style in the 50s. Another of the figures profiled is this fellow by the name of Junior Parker. Absolutely great singer and harmonica player from Mississippi. But his style was a lot more kind of flashy and urban than a lot of the blues men who came from that generation. He was a lot like Elvis, born in Mississippi, but had ambitions, to live in the city and be a top flight entertainer, which he was. Well, Junior wrote and recorded a song called Mystery Train, which a lot of people in hindsight look back on as being Elvis's best recording, because Elvis covered it in 1955, 2 years later. So as you can see, these are all kind of mythical pieces of what we all identify as being core components of the Elvis Presley magic. And yet there are these very clear African-American precedents to all of them. The last of the figures is in some ways like I think the most important for this whole theme. It's a man named Calvin Newborn. And of course, we understand that Elvis is a singer, and we know a lot of his songs, and we know a lot of his vocal tricks. But the thing that really elevated Presley to superstardom in 1956 is when he first got on TV, and people could see him. And it was really his dance moves, Elvis the pelvis, as they used to call it. His hip thrusting, leg shaking action that really put him over the top. Well, as it turned out, he also was influenced in that kind of dance by an African-American performer, Calvin Newborn. Now, Calvin is the only one of these people who I got to know personally. Everybody else is long dead, but Calvin lived until I think it was 2018. And so I got to know him for about 15 years. And when I first met him, he told these stories about teaching Elvis to dance. And of course, he set the stories in the time before Elvis, was anybody, had made any records or anything like that. I'm going to cut this light on because that's just a little too ambient. There we go. And so he told me these stories, and for whatever reason, I guess I thought he was bragging. I just questioned his credibility. I wasn't sure that what he was telling was really the truth. It took me about 10 years to catch up to the fact that he was indeed who he said he was. And there were plenty of people to verify that. As a researcher, one of my real joys is when I pick up a little breadcrumb in an interview with someone that I'm then able to follow in another kind of unintended direction, but it ends up leading me somewhere good. With Calvin Newborn, in interviewing him, he told me about how he brought Elvis up to this club in Memphis called the Flamingo Room. And that was where they went to go see this artist by the name of Pee Wee Crayton. So I take that name, Pee Wee Crayton, and I say, maybe I can do something with this. And from there, I was able to find other corroborating interviews that had been done, when I was a little kid by other people, with other people, that talked about Elvis coming up to the Flamingo Room to see Pee Wee Crayton. So I was like, oh, this is it right here. Well, then I go to the newspaper records to try and see what can be found, and ended up figuring out what the date of this particular show was. And it happened weeks before Elvis's first recording session. And so there Elvis was, a couple weeks before his version of That's All Right Mama was first recorded in an African-American club in Memphis, where the band not only were, hip thrusting and pelvic rocking and whatever, but it was an African-American band. They specialized in rhythm and blues and jazz, but as a novelty, because they had to work 7 nights a week, they had to do something different, to entertain the crowds. They had what they called a hillbilly night, where all of the African-American musicians put on, overalls, straw hats, corncob pipes, all that kind of stuff, and played basically white hillbilly music. Well, fast forward 2 weeks, that's exactly what Elvis did when making his first record. And so when people talk about how Elvis is the father of rock and roll, they base it on the fact that he combined those musics, the African-American rhythm and blues music and the country music. Well, that same thing was already happening among African-American performers in Memphis, like the title of the book says, Before Elvis. So, all of these characters have their own story. And the point of the book, I want people to learn about these people, obviously, but I want them to learn about Elvis as well, because I think that there's something to be taken both ways. In one respect, you know, Elvis has been a lightning rod for criticism about Black musicians being ripped off. And so I got into that in terms of the research. I really just wanted to know, you know, what really happened with that. I'll give you the example of Arthur Crudup, the fellow who recorded Elvis's first song, as a way of getting into it. So Crudup went up to Chicago from Mississippi, where he was from, in order to try and make it in music. This happened in, I guess it was before World War II, so it's around 1940, 41. Had no connections, no experience, no name, really not that much going for him. It probably wasn't a terrific idea. And it looked like that pretty quickly, because he was living under the L. Y'all know what the L is, the elevated train. And I think it was at 49th Street. Anyway, so he's living, you know, basically under the train station right there. And he's rolling out his guitar during the day and busking out on the street corner for money. One of the people who passed by him was this white record producer by the name of Lester Melrose. Well, Lester Melrose happened to be the answer to Big Boy Crudup's prayers. He was the key producer of Chicago blues artists, and he had helped all kinds of people release their records on RCA, a major, you know, American record corporation. And so he asked Crudup, "Well, you want to make a record?" And Crudup's like, "Hell yeah!" And so Crudup was a very prolific lyricist. He was able to write a lot of songs, and a lot of good songs. And so he was able to very quickly put together a body of recorded works and continue to get paid for his recording sessions. So this was really how he was making money. $10, $25, $50 hits for a single song being recorded. In the agreement, I don't even know if there was a signed contract between them, but in the arrangement, you know, between Crudup and Melrose, Melrose got Crudup to agree to give up his own, that is Crudup's, publishing rights. Well, if you're trying to make a record, you don't give a damn about publishing has nothing to do with anything. Sure, take the publishing rights. That's really the key to the cash flow on a song. That's the ownership and the copyright, and that is the person who the publishing owner is the person who receives the income from the song, and they can go out and do with it whatever they want to. They can get other people to record the song and exploit it that way. And so by trading his long-term rights for a short-term payment, Crudup, unbeknownst to himself, cost himself hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. Because ultimately, those copyrights went into Melrose's catalog. Melrose turned around and sold the catalog to Elvis Presley Music and a company called Hill and Range. And so when Elvis came out with his own version of Crudup's That's All Right, if you look at the record, the Sun Records, the company in Memphis that Elvis recorded for, if you look at a copy of that record, you will see that Crudup is properly credited on the label itself as the composer of the song. So that's one step. Another is that I found canceled checks from Sun Records to the copyright holder of the song That's All Right. So not only did Elvis and his producer Sam Phillips properly credit Crudup as the author of the song, but they legally paid the copyright holder for the royalties for the use of the song. The problem is that wasn't Crudup, it was this Lester Melrose. And so those are the kind of convoluted scenarios through which Black musicians got ripped off. And in some cases, left Elvis holding the bag, you know, because he is the visible one. Nobody knows or cares who Lester Melrose is, what Hill and Range Publishing is. Those are the people who are really in the weeds, though, who have this kind of knowledge about how the business, how music business really works and how that money flows. Big Mama Thornton is another, and the song of Hound Dog. Hound Dog has been called the most litigated piece of music in American history. Whether or not that's verifiable, I'm not entirely sure. But there have been a heck of a lot of lawsuits over that song. And Big Mama always felt ripped off by Elvis because he really did skyrocket to fame in part thanks to that song, which of course she considered to be her own. Problem, once again, is she was not one of the songwriters, and so she did not have a piece of the income that Elvis generated with his version. Paradoxically enough, it was that song was owned by an African American music business person by the name of Don Robey, and so Elvis's version did, in fact, kind of make a black man rich. And I was talking to Mr. Robey's son about this, and he said, "Yeah, oh yeah, Dad loved Hound Dog. He loved Hound Dog so much he went and had a Hound Dog suit, custom tailor made, and apparently it's still in his closet." But you know, this dynamic of artists losing their music still goes on today, and it's more of a knowledgeable people exploiting naive people situation. And of course, race played into that dynamic heavily, particularly back during the 1940s when this all began. Big Mama Thornton was really interesting. So here we are, we're talking about these legacies of exploitation and appropriation. And I like to separate those two issues. Exploitation is when somebody's taking your money based on your creation. But appropriation, I think, is more like what Elvis did. There's no question that Elvis performed black music, that Elvis, I think, performed African American style dance and entertainment. He dressed like a black entertainer. I mean, there are people that I talked to who knew him who said that, yeah, he loved to hang out and eat pork chop sandwiches with us. He was a soulful dude. That's what they said about him. So that's kind of just who he was. And so with the story of Big Mama Thornton that I found so compelling, she was cut out of the riches of Hound Dog, but she figured out how to use the story to her advantage. And I credit her with introducing this conversation about appropriation and exploitation into our dialogue in this culture, because it became part of her story. She told journalists, she told fans, she created awareness about what can happen to artists and what happened to black artists being exploited. And she made Hound Dog a big part of her story, the way that she reached out to fans and identified with people. And so I credit her with really well, first of all, I think she was very savvy with creating that connection, with talking about it, creating that connection in people's minds. I think that it interested people in her music and in her story in the latter stages of her career. So she went on performing for another 30 years after Hound Dog. So she did not give up by any stretch. And at the same time, she was not obsessed with this. It was part of her professional presentation. But I know a person who told this great story that's in the book about riding down the road with Big Mama. And Big Mama liked to drive and drink Old Granddad whiskey as she was going down the road, and smoke cigarettes and talk all kinds of junk. And so he said they would just be going down the road for hours. She'd be sipping her whiskey and smoking and laughing and having a good time. And but there was another guy who was scared of Big Mama's driving, so he was cowering in the back seat. And so my friend, his name is Charlie Musselwhite, he was sitting up in the front seat with Big Mama, and she's had, half a pint of liquor or something like that, and goes around a big turn, and there's one of those like orange highway safety cones. She just smashes it and keeps going, doesn't even brake. And so Charlie asks her, he says, Big Mama, would you like for me to drive? And she said, why? And he said, you just ran over that cone back there. And she looks at him and she says, hell, I meant to hit that cone. So, you know what? Elvis became such a prisoner of his own life towards the end. I think that's part of his tragedy. And part of Big Mama's tragedy is that she, to some extent, lived in that shadow with that grief. But my God, she sure enough had her freedom. Towards the end of her life, the fellow who played drums on that recording of Hound Dog, his name was Johnny Otis. He left the music, well, he didn't leave the music business entirely, but he became an ordained minister and preached in a church there in Northern California. she was a severe alcoholic, and she knew that the end was coming, and she asked Johnny to preach her funeral. And she had one piece of advice for him. She said, keep it short and make him smile. So with that, let's throw some dirt on this talk. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be very happy to address them. And I'm not sure how I would find out about them.
Oh, so we're going to read the questions that are put in the chat. So if anybody has any questions or even a comment that they would like to make, you're more than welcome to put it in the chat. They're also welcome to raise their hand, and then we can allow them to unmute themselves. And somebody has already raised their hand. Okay, give me one second. Okay, so Ron, you should be allowed to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Thank you for this talk, first of all. I found
You're welcome.
it very...
And let me say thanks to all the people who have listened to it without an audience. You know, I'm kind of nothing, so I'm very appreciative of everybody who spends their time, you know, listening to the stories, reading the book. You can always holler at me with your questions here now or later. So sorry, go ahead, Ron.
No, it's okay. I have not yet read the book, but I'll say that one of my favorite books is Nick Toshi's Unsung Heroes of Rock and Roll, which you may or may not be familiar with.
Yes.
And it just seems like this might be sort of, sort of a companion to it, but I think you probably treat the subject in a more scholarly and less flippant way than Nick Toshi's did.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yes, that's fair.
I mean, he touched on people like Wynonie Harris and Jesse Stone. I mean, aside from the small handful of people you've previously mentioned, do you touch on a Wynonie or any of the other sort of now obscure blues or rhythm and blues people?
Yeah, Wynonie comes up a couple of times. And if you're a Wynonie fan, I think you should go to my book on the Chitlin Circuit, because he has a more prominent role in that book, which is a wider look at the rhythm and blues and the road to rock and roll, you know, in the 40s and 50s. But yes, Wynonie does. Wynonie's funny. When Elvis came out, one of the interesting things that happened, white people have always debated and talked about and gnashed our teeth about, well, you know, did Elvis really rip off black music? Well, black people have never questioned that. And so there's a really good record in the black press that dates to the time of Elvis Presley's, the earliest days of his career, of people talking about, yeah, this is kind of the same thing as, and then they list any number of musicians who preceded Elvis, because African-American audiences had been listening to and seeing this type of music for a long time. So a reporter, I think, from the Chicago Defender got in touch with Wynonie Harris and asked him about Elvis and one other, and I can't think of who that one other was, but asked him about, oh, you know, what do you think of this new kid Elvis? And Wynonie just said, he's a rank imposter. So that's too good of a quote. I had to include that. So Wynonie does get a shout out in Before Elvis, and I think he gets another mention in there, maybe for his version of Good Rockin' Tonight. But yes, Wynonie is definitely a stone cold Elvis predecessor for sure. The reason that these 5 artists end up being the main ones highlighted, one, they're each identifiable as an originator of a real firm cornerstone of something that we all know as Elvis, as Elvisiana. And at the same time, all these people narratively intertwine. And so all of these artists knew each other. They were all part of this kind of greater whole that became rock and roll. And it really peaked in 1953, the year prior to Elvis's first recording. And so that ends up being the key year where a lot of this action takes place. So yeah, I mean, it's people who had an important influence on Elvis, but then they also have to fit together, because there could have been a lot more people included. It could have, Otis Blackwell would have been a big one that has come up. He just didn't quite fit with I researched, it just didn't click. Roy Hamilton is another singer who Elvis looked up to and talked about a bit, which is also a little bit unusual. Elvis was not that open about his influences. He did give Arthur Crudup a lot of shout outs, though, and identified Crudup as his favorite singer, his inspiration, somebody who he wishes that he could feel like. So he really connected with Crudup, and things like that stand out.
Okay, so going with that, since you mentioned Crudup, there is a question in the chat about Crudup, and it says, uh, Crudup wrote a lot of material, but a lot of that material also borrowed from earlier blues songs,
Yeah.
traditional verses, etc. When we think about Elvis appropriating from Crudup, how do you think about Crudup appropriating from earlier blues artists?
Yeah, the example of Crudup appropriating that I give in the book is with that key line, "That's all right, mama." So that goes back to at least a recording artist by the name of Blind Lemon Jefferson, who was active in the late 20s. And there are several more instances that I've come across just as a listener of this music of "That's all right, mama, that's all right for you." So that was a stock phrase that a lot of people sang. Part of how we deal with that, though, is Crudup composed a song called "That's All Right." Okay, it had these exact words, these exact verses, this exact rhythm. He recorded it under his own name. He publicly issued it under his own name. That becomes legal precedent in a lot of these cases. Tracing blues lyric composership or true authorship, so difficult to do because of what you say. There are these floating verses that show up in a lot of different songs by a lot of different artists of a lot of different titles. But again, since Crudup had his name and the exact title on that recording, it does become his. Incidentally, or Lester Melrose's. Incidentally, I worked with Robert Johnson's stepsister on her memoir. And when she was attempting to access his estate, one of the things that she had to do or try to do was to go and prove his authorship of his songs because they were not copyrighted, or at least they couldn't find copyright information about them. And so she did something where she had to go and talk to a lot of the people that he knew in order to try and discern, well, had he written this song, or she had a very hard time with that naturally. So it is a complicated issue. Good question.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
You say in the introduction of your book that your hope is not only to get to know Elvis's influences, but to liberate them. Music has historically been a vehicle for liberation. I wanted to know how the exploration of Elvis's music helped you liberate his influences.
Well, I want them to be respected for who they are. And when you talk about somebody like Crudup, a lot of people only know of Junior Parker as the guy who originally wrote Mystery Train, even though Junior had this fantastic career that spanned from the early 50s until his death in 1971. I mean, he made great rock records, soul records, funk records, you name it. I mean, he was just a really prolific, innovative artist. Crudup, of course, I mean, he has this almost just weight on him historically as being the guy who lost all his money to Elvis. And I want for their stories of who they are to stand alone or stand stronger. They're never going to fully stand alone, but to really get their own due and have their own space rather than just the kind of back of the baseball card. Arthur Crudup originally wrote and recorded "That's All Right." I wanted them to have a say. I wanted them to have a voice. And so using Elvis to me made sense in opening the door because Elvis has a lot of fans. Elvis creates a lot of interest. If we can break off a little bit of that interest from Elvis fans and focus it on his influences, I think that's a good thing.
So I have a question about that, right? So um, this book is about, the influences that Elvis got from African American music. So how did you approach the challenge of balancing, Elvis's iconic legacy, right? Because he was a legend and to a lot of people, with the overlooked contribution from the African American artists who he was influenced by.
You mean in terms of like I don't know, the inequality sense?
Yes, right, because he's a legend. Some people
Right.
are like total Elvis fans to this day. I mean, uh, his house is still tourist, a
Yeah,
national
yeah, yeah,
tourist
yeah.
attraction. People are still writing books about him. So, in his own right, he became a legend. But his music and the things that he was famous for kind of, came off the back of African Americans. So, in writing that book, how did you kind of balance the two? Because in a way, I would kind of feel like some people, even though we know it, right, it's been well documented and people have wrote stories about it, some people kind of still get like, no, this is Elvis's music. We shouldn't,
Oh, oh,
bring, you
oh.
know what I mean? Like bring
Yeah,
up
yeah,
this
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah.
how do you balance the two? Like uh
I think there are,
writing about the history of it, but also keeping, with Elvis being the icon.
I mean, in terms of Elvis being an icon, I think that these stories humanize him because you get to see where Elvis was as a young man before he was any kind of famous. He was, a high school graduate barely who was driving a truck for an electrician and then hanging out in juke joints. I mean, he was nothing. He was no kind of famous yet, but he was drawn to African American music, and so I think there's I don't know. I mean, there's kind of a purity to that. Elvis, early in his life, in his career, was an anti-segregationist. Segregation was legal in Memphis. It was the law. It wasn't just a custom. And Elvis broke that on several occasions, both before and after he was famous. And so that taught me a lot about him as a person. I really was not aware of that because there are those rumors, that Elvis is racist. And I go into that a little bit in the book as well. I mean, there was one smear story published about Elvis back in 57 or 58, fairly early on, about him saying that black people could only buy his records and shine his shoes. Well, that stuck to him, forever. And I still meet and talk to people now who talk about, oh no, my father wouldn't allow me to have Elvis records in the house. He said he's a racist. So, and by the way, that story, all I have to do is turn it over to what really happened. A reporter from Jet magazine went and researched that and interviewed a lot of people who knew Elvis, including Reverend Brewster, who I talk about in the book, and including Elvis himself. And Elvis said, anybody knows me knows that I would never say anything like that. And like a lot of white people, he went and named all of his black friends after that. But he, getting back to Reverend Brewster for a minute, Brewster was the one who really defied segregation. And so I think that he taught Elvis about how to make that kind of stand. So Brewster was a black minister. And of course, he had a large missionary Baptist church, black congregation. But he's a broadcaster on the radio. And so his show became very popular. And of course, the airwaves are not segregated. Anybody can listen who knows what channel and what time to do so. Well, Brewster started inviting white people to the church to listen to the music. And Elvis was among the people who went to the church to listen. And in fact, I have a photograph in the book that was taken in 1953 of this congregation. Mixed congregation, you can see, and it's not just, white people in the balcony and black people in the pews. It's everybody truly mixed. And so I think this had a big impression on him. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I went down a road there. But, these are the kinds of things in terms of, the myth and the real man that I felt like I had to deal with in order to tell the story in the right way.
Yes, thank you. You
All
did
right.
answer my question.
Okay, good. I can try to get around to it.
Oh gosh, more people coming in. Okay, so we have a few more questions coming in the chat.
Great.
Let's see. Uh, okay, wait, they went up so fast. Ron, yeah, okay. How can one contact the author outside of today's? Oh, wait. How can one contact the author outside of today's events? Will he be doing in-person events and signings related to the book? Okay, so that's directed to you. Will you be doing any more events outside of today's events or book signings or any way that they can contact you?
Ron, if you're going to be in the Deep South in April, you're in luck. I have an event in Oxford, Mississippi, with the conference of the book there on April 3rd. It's going to be at 6 p.m. It's a big radio show there, and then the next night at the Memphis Listening Lab, April the 4th. I'll be appearing with Robert Gordon, who's a fantastic author who's covered everything from Elvis to Stax and a bunch of other funky stuff in Memphis. So we're going to be doing a presentation on this book at the Memphis Listening Lab at Crosstown. And well, I don't think that's on my website, but go to my website, prestonlauterbach.info, and there's a contact tab or email address or something like that. But yeah, I'm not too hard to find.
Okay. Next question is from Leah. What is it about this subject and era that has drawn you in to become a scholar in this topic?
Oh, well, gosh, this is not a short answer. It's this particular book is like a whole life culmination. I'm 50. And Elvis died when I was 3, but I don't remember not knowing who Elvis was. And it's funny because you hear all these debates about how Elvis has overshadowed the black pioneers of rock and roll. But my mom was a 50s rocker, and I grew up listening to Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, Elvis, Buddy Holly, the black artist and the white. There was no distinction about all of that. I mean, it was just all of the good music. And I've always been interested in historical music. And when I finally figured out what I wanted to do with my life, which wasn't really that long ago, I started to draw on my passion and my connection, my deep connection to this music. And it's really about the stories, though. It's about getting to know the individuals, about hearing what they have been through, hearing what their family histories are. My gosh, Junior Parker, who's in this book, was like a ghost to history. I didn't know I was going to be able to find out anything about him because even his burial place is unknown. He died in 1971. Nobody knows where his grave is. He's that obscure and forgotten, which is terribly unfortunate. I was lucky enough to find his father's family in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And they trace their family history back to right after the Civil War, when I think they call him Grandpappy, but he's like their great 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 grandfather, won a house in a game of craps. And that became the old home place for this family. And it's still there. They took me to it. And so that's where Junior was raised. And I was like, oh my God, that's incredible. I mean, this whole legacy goes back to some people right after the days of slavery in a dice game. I mean, it's so crazy the things that happen. I mean, it's just like lightning in a bottle. So yes, I mean, the music has always spoken to me deeply, and then to be able to put the individuals' stories to them, which you can really only do through interviews. There's not a lot of hard data out there in the historical record. There are little pieces here and there, but in order to really get the flesh and blood, you got to get out there and talk to people, which I love doing.
Okay, so we have another question in the chat from Charmaine. Were there any challenges you faced while writing about this complex musical topic in a way that is accessible to a wider audience?
Well, nah, not really. It was pretty easy. The worst part was they didn't pay me enough or give me enough time to do it. But other than that, it was a breeze. I wasn't too bad. I don't, I think that okay, well, I mean, I'm a white guy doing Black history. So that's potentially odd, I guess, but I think only on the surface because, when I'm reaching out to African American historic figures and their families, most want to be able to tell their story and to be able to talk to somebody who gives a damn, which just doesn't happen every day. You know, and I don't know how it looks on the surface. I don't, well, I've been asked a couple of funny questions by journalists. One was, why do you hate Elvis? Because I think they assumed this was like some hard takedown, which it ended up not really being. And there was another one who was like, and this is, I think these are both from English people. English people, y'all crazy. So this other person was like, so when the movie came out, you just decided to write a book as some sort of a cash grab, right? I was like, well, duh, but but no, Charmaine. The challenges are they're I don't know. The challenges are different. I look at all these things as being pretty fun, and you have more or less infinite possibilities at first, and then they just sort of whittle down over time due to what you can find and where you can find it and how quickly. But most people are very amenable to talking. One funny thing happened. Arthur Crudup ended up living out his last years on the eastern shore of Virginia. So I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains in the western part of Virginia. So I drove out to the eastern shore just to see if I could find any traces of Arthur Crudup out there. So you have to drive over the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, which is like 10 miles across the bay. It's basically, it's not an island, it's a, what do you call it, peninsula. So you drive out there and it's just nothing. It's just farmland as far as the eye can see. So I'm driving up the road. What do I see? A massive billboard advertising an Elvis tribute artist. So I'm like, okay, where's the Arthur Crudup tribute artist? We don't need an Elvis tribute artist out here. We need Big Boy Crudup representation. So I pulled up to a gas station, and there's a lady pumping gas right up in front of me. And I went up to her and I said, you don't happen to know any Crudups, do you? And she kind of like gave me the, hold on, got her phone out, and like 10 seconds later, I'm FaceTiming with Arthur Big Boy Crudup's grandson. So, sometimes it's just a good day. The Lord smiles upon you.
So, aside from challenges, because you mentioned that it wasn't that challenging. Surprisingly, people want to share their story. And
Yep.
I've actually heard that from a lot of, authors who write, pieces on history, or we had another author who wrote a true crime novel, and he said the same thing. It wasn't, finding the people was the hardest part. But once you
Mm-hmm.
find them, people usually want to share their stories. So
Definitely.
aside from the challenges, were there any surprises or unexpected connections you found between Elvis and the early African American artists?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think of one from, man, I mean, there are kind of a lot. I'll tell you one that stood out to me as really compelling. So Calvin Newborn, the guy I was telling you about, who was the original pelvic thruster, taught Elvis to dance, the leg shaker. So he was telling me about how Elvis came up on stage with himself and his family's band, and that his father, Phineas Newborn Sr., was playing the drums. And the way Phineas Sr. played what he called the mash, which is this particular blues rhythm, this hard beat, he said that helped Elvis get his timing down as a vocalist and to really discover his rhythm. And I thought that was really interesting because timing is key to a vocalist. If your time is off, you got nothing. I mean, Big Mama Thornton even talked about it. She talked about how she did not have her timing down, and then once she figured it out, it all clicked for her. And so that aspect of rhythm and timing is so crucial. And then if you listen, Elvis recorded about 4 more or less vanity records that he actually went in and paid to record rather than getting paid to do them. And you can listen to those, and you can hear he's got the rich, deep Elvis voice. He has the pretty vocal talent, but he just doesn't have it. He just doesn't have the punch. He doesn't have his timing down yet. He's just a young, inexperienced vocalist. Fast forward to his recording of That All Right, that first real record, and he's got it, that rhythm. And so supposedly, I mean, there's no other explanation for it that I'm aware of, but that this took place specifically with Elvis jamming with Black musicians. So I thought that was really fascinating. I don't think anybody else has really picked up on that yet, but I keep selling it.
Okay. We have another question in the chat from Indira. What were some of the challenges in writing this book about an iconic figure? And what do you hope will be the long-term impact of your book?
Well, I hope that the big thing is, I hope that these artists who were the roots of Elvis can become as household as Elvis is. That's probably a long shot. But at the very least, let's equal our appreciation and our respect, not just for the rich and the famous, but for the creators and the originators that really made it all possible. So it's really just about recognition. And then look, I want everybody to listen to this music. Pick up a copy of the book from the Queensboro Public Library. You got to get on a waiting list, unfortunately, because they're all checked out. But get you a book and start flipping through that thing, and every song that you see, pop it up. All of them are on YouTube. And I use YouTube because it's more or less free. You might have to sit through an ad, and every track named in this book is on there because people are insane and they post everything. So YouTube's a great resource. I can't really speak to the other streaming services necessarily, but that would be my go-to for that. So yeah, I really hope that people listen to, and the music's phenomenal. So listen to the music and love it. That's my big takeaway.
I had a question just about speaking of the music. In the interview that I was listening to on for CBTCB Cast, you guys were talking about Mystery Train and how it's perhaps referenced in Beyonce's 16 Carriages. I wanted to know if you think that we're still like hearing and seeing echoes of Elvis's music in other like modern music.
Ooh, nice question. That's a good one. See, I'm not really sure. I don't listen to up-to-date stuff, so it's really hard for me to say. Beyonce is the best example, not even necessarily for echoing that line, but I think with Cowboy Carter, what she has done is something that artists don't do enough of anymore, but that Elvis Presley in the later part of his career really did, which was take a whole piece of American history, a big piece of America, and just interpret that in her art form for people. So she's not just like reading the Wikipedia entries on, all of these whatever singers and rodeo stars from way back when. She's really telling the story in her way and interpreting it. And it's like, it's all of the little things. And so that's the best current example that I'm aware of. And it's not even like a, apples to apples comparison. It's more of a spirit, because I think the spirit of what she's doing with the Cowboy Carter on the Chitlin circuit concept is, it's a big American story that she is telling through her songs. And so that's really cool. I don't really give a darn about, people's breakup emotions. We all go through it. People's kind of individual experience about being rich and about, flashing their wealth and all that. It doesn't do anything for me. I want a big story. And so Beyonce, to me, she's like a novelist, a historian. I mean, she's doing it all on that. And so that's something that I think is comparable to the way that that Elvis liked to tell a story, for sure.
Okay. So we have some more questions in the chat, and we have a few, like 5 more minutes left. But in the beginning, you were talking about a story that you wanted to tell, and there is a question. Will you share your near-death experience?
Maybe I should do that once all the Elvis questions have been answered.
Oh, absolutely, we could do that too.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. We
let's
have
go
time.
to
I promise I
Ron's
will.
question. He said, will you touch at any point in your future writings about Elvis's white influences? I like example Dean Martin, hillbilly artists, the Statesmen, and other white gospel acts.
So good question. The answer for me is no. It's a no for me. But because I'm a black music historian. That's what I love. It's what I listen to. It's what I really care about and value. And it's not to take away from any of that stuff, which I like. It's just to say I can't do a whole book on it. But I get the value. I think what's important about black music to Elvis, and you mentioned a lot of good kind of comparison artists right there. Elvis, without the African American ingredients of his sound, would have been another country artist, basically. You know what I mean? He would not have been this new and different phenomena that he was. And so to me, it's that ingredient of African American culture that ended up making him special and different. And so that's why I focus on that aspect of it, to be more specific. But yeah, I mean, the Blackwood brothers and the States. I mean, all that stuff's phenomenal. Love old Jerry Lee, Hank Williams. I mean, you name it. All that stuff's great.
Okay. So the last question from Indira is actually about banned books, since the country is
Oh,
banning books
yeah.
and things like that. So her question is, what do you think is a loss when books are banned, and how does it affect an author's freedom of writing?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, just the whole threat of banning books is so completely horrifying and disgusting. Um, I grew up with freedom of speech being uh, such an important right that I can't believe that it's being questioned now or threatened. It's still just so utterly shocking to me. At the same time, those of us who are against that sort of thinking, we have to be part of a resistance. We have to resist that, and yeah, I think it makes it all the more crucial that we write our books and that we tell our truth. You know what I mean? Because if it's in jeopardy, I mean, who's it threatening? If it has to be banned, so that's always there's that kind of reverse intention of banning books. You make them more powerful, and I think that could happen. So let's wait and see. I hope that the role of the author is always really important and always really meaningful. Books do something that no other medium can, and so I hope that uh, any kind of endangerment or threat that we experience makes us stronger, more committed. Do I have time for my near-death experience?
Yes, you do.
Okay, everybody. I had a near-death experience this afternoon. Where I live here in Virginia, we just got maybe like 3 inches of snow, and I live at the top of about a steep, I don't know, 400 or 500 foot driveway, paved for the most part. And so my wife went out for a while, took my daughter, and they went out and did some work and ran some errands. And we had talked about trying to drive the car up the driveway, and we were like, we don't really need it up here. Let's park it at the bottom of the driveway and walk up, which is what we normally do in snowstorms. So I get this phone call from my wife, and she says to me, I started to drive the car up the driveway, and it felt like it kind of started to slip. And so I just stopped, and I'm just going to park it here. Is that okay with you? And I was like, well, I mean, yeah, I didn't think we were going to drive it up until later. And, but sure, don't drive it up if it's unsafe. And then all of a sudden she starts saying, oh my God, the car's slipping. Oh my God, the car's slipping. Oh my God. And I hear her like she's moving fast. And I'm like, holy shit, what the hell am I supposed to do? So I yell into the phone, "Can you jump out?" And she says, "Oh no, I'm not in the car. It's just rolling down the hill." So for a minute, I thought she was going to die. And then I thought I was going to die of a heart attack or stroke or something like that. And then I thought the car was going to die. But as it turned out, the car went down like, I don't know, 75 feet of driveway backwards with nobody in it, and then hit a snowdrift and stopped. So we made it.
I think we have one more question that we can ask. I see it from Brennan.
Yes, we do have one more question from Brennan. Brennan asks, can you contrast how Elvis borrowed from Black artists versus how musicians like Crew Cuts copied songs from Shaboom from the Chords? Songs like Shaboom from the Chords.
I'm not going to answer your question very well, just because I'm not sure of the Crew Cuts story, and I'm not really sure how they did it. So I will talk about the kind of the ethics of cover songs as it was explained to me. One of the problems that took place during the 1950s is that the Black music world was small. You had compared to white pop, and the music business was segregated. There was a little bit of crossover, but mostly, there were a few Black radio stations, Black record stores, Black performance venues, Black art. It was a standalone Black music industry, rhythm and blues, right? Jazz to some degree. And then you had white pop as a much bigger field with more of the radio dial, more of the retail shelf space, more of the TV opportunities as they became available. The white audience is a much larger audience. They don't really access the Black music that much. Some, again, do, but for the most part, they have no clue. And so when an artist like Elvis comes on TV and does, Shake, Rattle, and Roll or Ready Teddy, which were Black authored songs that he performed early in his TV appearances, and people see him, shaking his leg and everything for the first time, they're blown away. And of course, they think, since they're seeing it for the first time, that it's the first time it happened, and they're not automatically aware of all of the story that we've been talking about here. And so that was a dynamic that happened a lot with white artists covering rhythm and blues, African American rhythm and blues recordings. And so there are a handful of artists, Pat Boone being the most obvious, and Elvis to another degree, who would, as soon as a rhythm and blues hit came out, Little Richard's Tutti Frutti is a great example. Well, they'd record a version of it for the white market, just like that, instantly. And then whatever possibility that original had of either crossing over to find a white audience or getting up on the chart was just smashed. So in that case, the white cover really did stamp out the Black original. And so that's extra messed up. Now, somebody explained to me that Elvis tried to, instead of do covers, which is an immediate re-recording of a current hit, in other words, something that is really going to hurt the economic ability of that original record to do any business. Instead of that, he did what he called remakes, Hound Dog being a great example, since it was 3 years after the Big Mama Thornton record. The Big Mama Thornton record, to be perfectly honest, was dead. The Arthur Crudup record, That's All Right, was dead by the time Elvis's versions came out. And so theoretically, at least, Elvis's versions can bring new life to those originals. It never works out that way. But at least in theory, it provides another opportunity for that artist to get some exposure based on the Elvis connection. Brennan, I don't know if that got anywhere near what you were getting at with the Crew Cuts, but that's one of the racial dynamics in music that took place at that time with those different markets, the Black market and the white market.
Okay, thank you. So we are winding down, but before you go, can you tell us if you're currently working on anything, another book, and also do you plan to release more books in the future with like similar themes or kind of with the same theme?
I mean, God willing, yes. I'm currently working on a book that's a little more New York, so I'll have to come back to it and we'll do this again. It's about the last generation of Black musicians before hip hop. So it's all of,
Oh,
the music business gangsters and the first generation of Black music executives, along with a bunch of innovative artists like Isaac Hayes, who really revolutionized music in the 1970s. So that's it in a nutshell. And hopefully that will be done this year and out next. And then after that, I don't even know.
okay. Well, that concludes our program for this evening. I want to thank everyone for joining us for tonight's Literary Thursday. We hope to see you next week when we have the pleasure of interviewing, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to butcher this name. Sorry, guys. Um, pretty Kana 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 Kamandala, Kana Kamandala, I think is her last name. Sorry, I'm pretty sure I butchered that. Um, but in any case, she is the author of Brooklynites, the remarkable story of the free Black communities that spared a borough. Thank you again, and we hope to see you all next week. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Preston.
All right.
Yes,
Thank you all
thank you,
for having me.
Preston.
All right.
Thank you for joining us.